Now let's look at how much diversity do we see in this little piece of DNA that everyone in the world has? The answer was not much. And then how long would it take to accumulate all those mutations based on, some normal mutation rate? The answer was 5,000 or 6,000 years. So our female ancestor of everyone in the world lived 5,000 or 6,000 years ago. Oh.
I'm Timothy Mahoney, an investigative filmmaker. I was raised to believe the events of the Bible really happened. But as I grew older, I was challenged to lose those beliefs. Join me on this journey as we investigate the Bible, and I will show you an amazing pattern of evidence that will inspire your faith. Well, welcome back, thinkers. We're here again with Dr. Robert Carter from Creation Ministries International, and we're going to be talking about biblical genetics. Welcome, Rob. Thank you for being a part of this podcast.
Thanks, Tim. It's my delight, and I hope we can encourage your audience a little bit today.
There's been a lot of young people that I've met that are illiterate to the big ideas, to the Bible, and to the evidence. And there's a lot of evidence that is suggested that it's evidence on evolution that I found that it's actually very weak, and it's more like a marketing or PR campaign than it is real evidence.
Yeah, but I was that young person who had not spent any time studying, who had all these giant questions, whose faith was paper thin, and who was really worried that I was going to lose it all. I've been there. I've struggled with these topics. Even after becoming a Christian and learning about the Bible, I went through a really dark period in my late 20s where I was doubting everything. If a listener is wrestling, I think you and I both understand the struggle. It's not like you become a Christian and magically you know everything and all your questions are answered and you have no doubts or second thoughts. No, that's not true. But we do have answers. We just have to spend the time working through them. Hopefully we get some answers today.
Both of us have had this experience where we know what it's like to be in a difficult place. And right now there's millions and millions of young people and maybe adults that are like, can I believe any of this? Do I believe the Bible? Can I trust it? What I would say is that as we've been working through some of these questions, there's a verse that comes to my mind. It's prepare the way of the Lord, make straight his paths. There's like mountains that are high and there's valleys that are low. And I think that some of the work that I'm doing, that you're doing, is that there's a mountain of unbelief, or there's a valley, that someone's saying, hey, there's a problem here, and it's obscuring the way to see the Lord or come to the Lord, because these mountains of ideas or ideologies are in the way, and they're distracting people from that. So let's just talk about biblical genetics. How did you come up with that terminology, and what is biblical genetics?
Well, for someone who loves genetics and someone who loves genealogy and someone who loves history and who loves the Bible, I said, I want to spend a significant portion of my life, I want to dedicate it to studying genetics in relation to biblical history. And so biblical genetics was just a natural combination of those two ideas. But before we go anywhere, I want to tell the audience, my strategy is to take the most conservative position possible and see if it can be defended. And throughout my career, most of the time I've done that. It's like, oh yeah, this is a reasonable hypothesis. This actually does work. The data do support it. But the reason I take that strategy is because if I can't defend the most difficult position, well, the fallback position will be easier to defend. And so let's go for it. Let's get the hardest possible thing and see if that works. And honestly, almost all the time it does work. That's the opposite of starting at the bottom. Let's see if we can defend this little aspect of the Bible, and it's not really a big one, but let's just make sure there. No, I want to go for it. I want to go to the top level and hit as hard as I can, and then see what happens.
I'll tell you, I have a little bit, I think, a genetic experience. We're dealing with the Exodus, the connection to Moses and his family. Now, there were people, I know there's a group of people called Kohanim. They were to be the priests, correct?
The Kohanim, people with the last name of Cohen and Khan and a few other names, are assumed to be Levitical. They're assumed to be descendants of Aaron, and they're the only Jewish group that has maintained a sense of what tribe they belong to over the thousands of years.
I went to Haifa, and there's a Dr. Skorecki. He was a DNA researcher, and the problem was that there were these people who said they were Kohanim. And what was interesting is that they came from different parts of the world. The different types of Jewish people, some of them were African, and some of them were Indian, and some of them were, different shades of Jewishness. But they all basically were saying, well, this is my lineage. And so they took and they did a test, and they found that they all went back. They published it in a peer review magazine. They all went back to a common ancestor.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I've written about this. I've done some episodes of Biblical Genetics on YouTube on this subject. I've written about it on creation.com. 70% of the men in the Kohanim had the same Y chromosome, which tells us they came from the same paternal lineage. But not all of them did, just most of them. But, adoptions or infidelity or someone lying about their family to gain status, you wouldn't expect every single man over, it's been, 3,000 years since the diaspora, since those people spread out. But the fact that most of them have the same Y chromosome was an absolute shock.
This is exciting when you think about the fact that today you're able to work with genetics. And, genetics is what people are doing, for finding out their ancestry, right? Most people today don't have any connection with their ancestry. Very few people know that, hey, my relatives came over on the Mayflower. Or is that you? Were the Carters part of that?
Not the Carters, no. The Brewsters were. I'm descended from the preacher on the Mayflower.
Well, that's interesting because I've been on a whole nother project I'm working on right now is the American Revolution and American history. And so we're working on that, and very exciting, called The American Miracle. But so genetics is a big deal. What's happening? Tell us what's exciting. And now you've come up with this biblical genetic investigation. How did it begin?
My first job out of graduate school, my first real job, I got a job at the Institute for Creation Research back before they moved to Texas when they were still in California. And I was working for Dr. John Sanford, who's the developer of the gene gun, and he developed the theory of genetic entropy. And he was my mentor in a lot of ways. Basically, I had been a doctor for less than a year, and I end up in California. I'm working for them. And the first task he said, okay, Rob, look at all of the mitochondria. That's the piece of DNA we only get from our mothers, and where they're found in the world, and compare them to languages. Because if the Tower of Babel is true and God separated people according to language, then a different language group should have different female lineages. And I failed. That project fell flat on its face. And I was like, uh-oh. But then, wait a minute. No, wait, hold it. Hey, John, I said, God didn't separate the people according to the female lineage. He separated them according to the male lineage. It was a very patriarchal society. So females, if they married across from one family to the other, when they spread out of Babel, each of the groups would have all the different female lines, and that's pretty much true. Oh. But then the next step, I said, okay, now let's look at how much diversity do we see in this little piece of DNA that everyone in the world has? The answer was not much. And then how long would it take to accumulate all those mutations based on, some normal mutation rate? The answer was 5,000 or 6,000 years. So our female ancestor of everyone in the world lived 5,000 or 6,000 years ago. Oh.
Are you saying that there is a common female ancestor for all people?
Every single person in the world has a single female ancestor. And that is represented by a little piece of DNA called a mitochondrial chromosome, or mitochondrial DNA. It happens to be very, very different than the chimpanzee mitochondrial DNA. Extremely different. And our ancestress lived only a few thousand years ago. Now, you can't put an exact date on that because What was the mutation rate 3,000 years ago? That depends on a lot of things. But if you just take a modern mutation rate, which we can measure by studying families, two parents and a child, well, you can look at the mitochondria in the mother and the child. And if you do thousands upon thousands of those, you can count the mutation rate. And it's about one mutation every 10 generations, one mutation every 5 generations. That puts Eve, that we like to call her, just a couple thousand years ago.
When you say couple thousand years ago, is that, I mean, when I say couple thousand, I would think 2 or 3. Are you saying 5 or 6?
5 or 6. Now, the evolutionary date for Eve is 200, 300,000 years ago. But they're using a ridiculously low mutation rate that's not the mutation rate we can measure in a laboratory or in family trees. But they have to do that. They can't have a biblical Eve. It doesn't match their views of history. It doesn't match their views of evolution. But the same is true for Adam. There is one Y chromosome in every single man on the planet. And again, it's rad. In fact, they just fully sequenced the chimpanzee Y chromosome last summer. There's like a 30% similarity between the chimpanzee Y chromosome and the human Y chromosome. They're completely different from one another. And yet all men in the world have one that is very similar. And if you look at the number of differences between the men, figure out the mutation rate from father to son, and Adam also is only a few thousand years ago.
So let me get this straight now. What you're saying is that through genetics, you're able to see that there is a link all the way back to one female, and there's a link all the way back to one male. And these genetic links aren't anywhere close to being anything compared to a chimpanzee or some type of an ape.
Yep. And when we try to put a time frame on them, they're thousands, not tens and not hundreds of thousands of years ago.
So the evolutionary storyline is more fantasy than it would be reality.
Consider the fact that the Bible demands there's an Adam and an Eve. And genetics tells us there's an Adam and an Eve. Evolutionary theory does not demand an Adam and an Eve. We could share Y chromosomes and mitochondria with any monkey, apes, gorillas, orangutans, chimpanzees. We could have been not very much different from those other species, but we are very different, and there's only one Y chromosome and one mitochondrial lineage. That's a very biblical proposition.
Is this accepted that there's basically all humans have come from these two?
Yes, but because the evolutionary model doesn't have an Adam and Eve as a couple, they have in Africa hundreds of thousands of years ago, our population got very small. We nearly went extinct. And in small populations, you have a lot of inbreeding. And in the inbred population, the branches of the family tree tend to get pruned. They get lost. You lose diversity. And given enough time, a very long time, in a small population, eventually only one Y chromosome survives. All the other ones happen to get lost. So their Adam isn't the founder of the human race. He's just a person who's alive in a population who just through dumb luck, his Y chromosome just happens to be the only one past the living people today.
What you just explained is that their explanation is that this struggle to become human took a very, very long time. And by dumb luck, this Y chromosome made its way through the channel that became the Y chromosome. Similar to the dumb luck that this planet, which is incredibly refined with all the creation of all the animals, just happened to evolve into all the species with all the male and female and all the mating and all of the vision and sight, and that humans were evolved with emotions and feeling and art and beauty and love. That just dumb luck. It just all happened. It's amazing.
I just read an article a couple days ago talking about the black hole that's at the center of the Milky Way. And it said that if it was like all the other black holes at the center of other galaxies, there would be no life on Earth. Because for some reason, the black hole at the middle of the center of the Milky Way doesn't release a lot of radiation. In other galaxies, there's so much radiation coming off the black holes, that it would exterminate life throughout the entire galaxy. So just one more example of fine-tuning, and again, as we're saying, dumb luck, that allows humans to be here.
There's probably some people that are Christians that are evolutionists. Let's help have a dialogue here. Is this research, like common understanding that this research there is, like the Bible says, one Eve and one Adam, and we find the genetics of all people go back to these two? When did that research, get introduced?
1988, Kahn, Wilson, and Stone King, I think it was, their first paper on mitochondrial genetics. They concluded that we came out of Africa. And in order to do that, we had to have a bottleneck. And that's really where it came from. The idea of the out of Africa theory, which a lot of people already believed, but this actually gave them genetic evidence for it. And the thought that we went through a giant bottleneck and that Eve was just a quirk of statistics, not the founder of the human race.
When you're looking at this, though, that's not what you believe, correct?
No, not at all. Not at all.
Okay, so explain to the audience and to myself what you think really happened.
The biblical story, the biblical account is very clear that we started from a couple named Adam and Eve. The population grew for about 16 or 1700 years to some unknown number. The Bible says the earth is full of violence. I assume a lot of murder, a lot of death. God got frustrated with the world. He found, apparently, was the only righteous person left, a man named Noah. He said, Noah, I'm going to destroy the world. So he sends a great flood, destroys every single person, all the land-based animals that weren't on the ark, not bacteria, not whales, but the vertebrate animals that had to be on the ark to survive. He builds a big ship, we called it an ark. After the flood, the people and the animals come off of the ark and they repopulate the world. And on the ark, there are only 8 people. That's Noah, his wife, their 3 sons, and their 3 daughters-in-law. So that's actually a genetic statement. Adam and Eve, Noah's flood, those are statements on genetics because it limits the number of people, limits the amount of diversity, puts a limit on the time frame on when these things could have happened. And from there, we have to explain Neanderthals. We have to explain the similarity of chimps and humans. We have to explain all sorts of things. And I think we can do it. And we've done a lot of work already. There's a lot of work still to be done. But we've answered some giant questions and published the answers.
Well, this is fascinating. Well, I'll tell you what, thinkers, we're going to have to come back. You're going to have to come back for the next episode to learn more about this. And Rob, where can people go right now to learn more about what you have?
If I was a thinker and interested in this topic, first thing I would do is I would go to creation.com. I might type in my name, Carter, and look at my bio, which lists all of my articles, or I just might type in something in the search box about genetics, Adam and Eve, or something like that. But if you want to get to the genetics things, it's easier just go through my name and find my articles. After that, I might look at my YouTube channel, Biblical Genetics. So creation.com first, that's first where I would go. After that, Biblical Genetics, just a fun topic where I'm talking about a lot of things, and a lot of my videos I'm pointing back to my work on creation.com on purpose.
That sounds great. Okay, thinkers, thanks for being with us. We'll be back next time to talk with Dr. Robert Carter from Creation Ministries International. We're going to be talking about biblical genetics. Until then, keep on thinking.
If you have enjoyed this program, you can help create more films preserving the historical credibility of the Bible with your tax-deductible gift of $30 or more to the Patterns of Evidence Foundation. With your donation, you will receive a Patterns of Evidence film of your choice. Build your personal inspirational library and help us make more Bible-affirming films that you can share with your family and friends.
If this episode leaves you in deep thought, join the club. Become a thinker, a free membership program giving people like you a closer look at the archaeological findings leading to patterns of evidence for biblical events.